Mr. Cram.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here this afternoon and for all of your thorough and diligent work in the most recent round of audits. Commissioner DeMarco, I'd like to start with you. In Report 7, you've made a number of alarming statements about the government's emission reduction goals. You've said that their plan remains insufficient to meet Canada's target, that Canada was the worst performer amongst the G7 countries, that their measures were often overly optimistic, had missing and inconsistent information, and so forth. So in light of your findings in Report 7, I would like to read to you a series of statements, and I was wondering if you could share with the committee if those statements are accurate or inaccurate. So on May 8th in the House of Commons, Minister Guilbeault stated, quote, "For the first time in the history of Canada, we are on track to meet our 2026 and 2030 emissions targets." Commissioner, would you say that statement is accurate or inaccurate?
So we haven't done an analysis of their projections for 2026, the interim objective that we just talked about. They have told us that they believe they're on track, so that's all I have to say about that. For 2030, I do not agree that Canada's existing measures put them on track for meeting 2030. There is a gap that needs to be filled for the measures to add up to 40 to 45%.
Okay. On October 8th of this year, Minister Guilbeault said in a CBC interview, he said, quote, "What is very clear is that our plan is working." Commissioner, would you agree that the government's plan is working to achieve our 2030 targets?
The plan, as I just said, doesn't add up to the 40 to 45% target, and that's Exhibit 7.1 shows how steep the graph would have to be to reach that target. But I want to caution that it's still only 2024. It's not time to give up. So it is possible to bridge that gap over the next 6 years. And, we do owe it to Canadians, present and future, to make that effort to bridge the gap. Simply because I'm saying they're not on track now doesn't mean that it's an impossible target to meet. There is still time to meet it, but it will require more measures than are in the plan right now.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. On January 29th, in the House of Commons, Parliamentary Secretary Vancouverton stated, quote, "We are ahead of our initial 2030 targets and firmly on track to meet the targets set out in our 2030 emissions plan." Commissioner, would you say that statement is accurate or inaccurate?
Well, they've never published a pathway between 2005 to 2030 in terms of annual targets, as we were just talking about. So I don't know what what shape of graph they were hoping for. So I can't really say one way or the other whether they're following the shape of graph that they intended. In terms of what you would require, just in terms of doing the math between now and 2030. We can't have any more years where it's just, 0.5% reduction or 1% reduction. We're going to need substantial reductions every year now between now and 2030 to reach that target.
Okay, let me put it this way then. If you look at Report 7 and you go to page 2 and you look at the graph on page 2, would it be accurate to say based on that graph that we are ahead of our 2030 target?
Well, the only way to be ahead of the target at the current time would be to have already met it, which some of our G7 colleagues have already reached the reductions that we're hoping for in 2030 already today. So that would be ahead of it. But as I said, I don't know what pathway he is thinking they're following. But if you just draw a line on Exhibit 7.1 in terms of extrapolating the data, no, we aren't on target. But that doesn't mean, the future isn't determined entirely by the past. We have the ability to bend that curve downwards, and that requires additional measures to do so.
Okay, and my last quote, Commissioner. In December of last year on Twitter, now known as X, Minister Guilbeault stated, quote, "Our climate plan is working. We are on track to meet our goals and achieve a strong, sustainable, and secure future." Minister, would you agree that the government is on track now to meet these goals?
with the measures they have, I think we've said this a few times today, but with the measures they have that are bankable and that can be modeled right now, they even recognize themselves, and it's actually stated in the progress report that was the first one that Environment Canada put out under the Act, that they don't have bankable measures yet to meet 40 to 45%.
Okay, thank you. Chair, and thank you again to the witnesses. Commissioner, I'll have one final question on Report 7. On page 7, you identified the Small Modular Reactor Action Plan as facing implementation challenges. Could you elaborate on what implementation challenges the Small Modular Reactor Action Plan is facing and what seems to be the holdup?
Okay, so the details on that are provided in Appendix B. So the Small Modular Reactor Action Plan implementation facing challenges are in 3 categories. Timeliness, so the measure was delayed. Expected emissions avoided, there had been no assessment of the expected emissions avoided for this measure, as we've heard earlier, and there had not been an assessment of value for money. So it faced all 3 of those types of challenges in our detailed analysis, which is found in Appendix B.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Let's shift gears now to Report 6, the critical minerals strategy. How many critical minerals mining permits have been issued since the launch of the critical minerals strategy?
I certainly don't know that answer. The answer to that, I'm not sure if you would know.
No, probably the department would be the best.
I would say NRCan would be the best source of information on that. But of course, permits are mostly provincial or territorial, not federal. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay, and to the best of, I'm sorry, do any of the department officials want to take that?
That is actually correct. It's mainly on the provincial level that the permits would be issued. We have, for example, fisheries permit that could be issued. We have explosive permits that could be issued. So for those, absolutely, we could provide you with those. But provinces have the main, territories have main responsibilities when it comes to mining.
Okay, but does that include uranium mining? I believe uranium mining is federally permitted, is it not?
Uranium is on the list of critical minerals.
Okay.
So we'd have to go back and verify that in terms of permitting.
Okay, if you could provide that answer in writing, I would appreciate it. Let's see. In your assessment of the critical mineral strategy, did you review how Canada's regulatory approval timelines compare to our international competitors?
I don't believe we did a comparison in terms of the timelines for approval. And of course, that would even change by province and territory because there is no one timeline for approving a mine in Canada. It's the main, as we just heard, the main permitting authorities are provinces and territories. So there would be many different timelines depending on the jurisdiction.
And Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time? Pretty much up. Okay. Okay.